"Do be careful, darling. You almost stepped in something." The voice, belonging to Lady Beatrice Finch, was a silken thread of condescension woven through the cacophony of the racecourse. Alistair Beaumont, the Duke of Blackwood, did not need to look to picture her expression. It would be one of mild, exquisite distaste, the same look she applied to a smudged glass or a poorly seasoned oyster. He turned. It was not something. It was someone. A child. A small boy of no more than 5 or 6 years, his cheap woolen trousers smudged with dirt, lay sprawled on the trampled grass between the grandstand and the betting stalls. A tumble of dark curls fell across his forehead, and his small face was puckered in the silent prelude to a great, heaving sob. Beatrice, a vision in cream lace and a hat adorned with a taxidermied bird that looked perpetually surprised, had indeed almost stepped on the boy's outstretched hand. She now held her skirts aloft as if the very air around the child were a contagion. Her gaze flickered over the fallen boy without a shred of concern, already seeking a more pleasant vista. "Someone should attend to that," she murmured, her attention snagged by the arrival of another peer's carriage. Alistair felt a familiar, weary disgust settle in his gut. It was an emotion he had grown accustomed to in the 2 years of his engagement to Beatrice. She was the perfect choice, or so everyone had told him. His cousin Marcus had been most insistent. Beatrice was beautiful, impeccably bred, and possessed a spine of pure, unbending steel. She was a woman who would never cause a scandal, never betray a flicker of unseemly emotion, never be anything less than a flawless duchess. She was, Alistair had come to realize, as cold and as carefully faceted as the diamonds she wore at her throat. His life with her stretched before him, like a long, perfectly manicured and utterly barren road. The crowd eddied around the small, fallen figure. People glanced down, a flicker of annoyance or fleeting pity in their eyes, before moving on. They were here for sport, for champagne, for the thrill of a wager won or lost. A dirty child on the ground was a minor obstruction, an untidy detail in an otherwise perfect day. Alistair felt a strange, unwelcome urge to move, to do something. But the Duke of Blackwood did not kneel in the dirt for urchins. It was not done. He was a prize bull on display, and his every action was noted, judged, and catalogued by the ravenous eyes of society. He remained frozen, a prisoner of his own title. Then the crowd parted. A woman pushed through, her movements economical and urgent, devoid of the languid grace of the ladies surrounding him. She was not dressed for the races. Her gown was of a dark, serviceable wool, clean but worn, the kind of dress a respectable shopkeeper's wife might wear on a Sunday. Her bonnet was plain, framing a face that struck Alistair with the force of a physical blow. He stopped breathing. The world, with its roar of horses and shouting bookies and tinkling laughter, went silent. All he could see was her. The face was thinner than he remembered, the fine, aristocratic bones more pronounced. There were lines around her eyes and mouth that had not been there 6 years ago, lines etched by hardship, not time. Her hands, as she reached for the boy, were not the soft, pale hands of a duchess. They were capable, a little rough, the hands of a woman who worked. But it was her, Eleanor, the wife he had erased, the woman he had been told was dead to the world, living off his bitter payoff on the continent, the ghost who haunted the vast, silent corridors of Blackwood Manor. She knelt. The simple act was a condemnation of every person standing around her. She knelt in the dirt and the trampled grass, her plain wool skirt pooling around her without a second thought. Her voice, when she spoke to the child, was a low, soothing murmur that vibrated through Alistair's bones, a sound he had once fallen asleep to every night. "Hush now, my love. It is all right. You are all right." She gently turned the boy over, her hands checking for scrapes with a practiced tenderness that made Alistair's chest ache. The child, who had been on the verge of a wail, quieted under her touch, his small body relaxing into her embrace. He looked up at her with absolute, unwavering trust. She picked up a small, crudely carved wooden horse that had fallen beside him and pressed it into his hand. Then she gathered him into her arms, lifting him with an ease that spoke of daily practice. As she stood, her gaze swept the crowd, a flicker of defiance in their depths. For a single, shattering second, her eyes met Alistair's. There was no recognition in them, no flicker of shared memory. There was only a cold, bottomless contempt, the look one might give to something utterly loathsome. Then she turned her back on him, on all of them, and was swallowed by the indifferent river of people. The small boy's dark head nestled securely against her shoulder. Alistair stood perfectly still, the world rushing back in a dizzying wave of sound and color. He felt as if he had been struck by lightning. The air smelled of rain and rot, though the sun was shining. The silk of his cravat felt like a slow, moving garrote against his throat. "Alistair, are you quite well?" Beatrice's voice was sharp, impatient. "You look as if you have seen a ghost." He could not answer, because he had. He had seen the ghost of his wife, the ghost of his own catastrophic failure, and that ghost had been holding a child with a tumble of dark curls and eyes that, even in his brief glimpse, had seemed achingly, horrifyingly familiar. The rest of the day passed in a blur of suffocating normalcy. Alistair moved through the motions, a perfectly constructed automaton of a duke. He accepted congratulations on his horse's victory in the third race. He smiled at acquaintances, his lips feeling stiff and foreign. He listened to Beatrice's dry commentary on the gowns and marital prospects of their peers, her words a meaningless drone against the roaring in his ears. Eleanor. Her name was a brand on his mind. He had not allowed himself to think it, let alone speak it, in 6 years. After the betrayal, the humiliation, the discovery of her letters to another man, he had followed his cousin Marcus's advice to the letter. He had excised her, a swift, brutally quiet annulment, citing a fictitious pre-contract that rendered their marriage void from its inception. It was a legal fiction, a clean, sharp cut designed to save the Blackwood name from the stain of divorce and infidelity. Marcus had handled everything. He had presented Alistair with the evidence of her treachery, his own face a mask of sorrowful duty. He had arranged the payoff, reporting back that Eleanor had taken the money without a word and departed for France, eager to begin her new life. Alistair, wounded in his pride and his heart, had wanted to believe it. He had needed to believe it. It was easier to believe her a mercenary traitor than to face the gaping wound of her loss. And so, he had erased her. He had burned her portraits, packed away her gowns, and forbidden her name from being spoken in his presence. He had become the duke his title demanded, cold, controlled, and utterly invulnerable. He had built a fortress of duty and cynicism around the hollow space where his heart had been. Now, a single glance from a woman in a worn wool dress had leveled that fortress to dust. The woman he saw today was not a traitor living in luxury on the continent. She was a survivor. The hardness in her face, the strength in her hands, the weary defiance in her eyes, those were not the marks of a woman enjoying a life of decadent exile. Those were the marks of a struggle he could not begin to imagine. And the child, the boy's age, he was 5, perhaps 6. The timing was a cold, sick knot in Alistair's stomach. They had been married for a little over a year when she left. It was possible. Dear God, it was possible. "That woman was remarkably brazen," Beatrice remarked, as their carriage rattled over the cobblestones back toward Mayfair, "kneeling in the filth like a common scullery maid. It sets a terrible example." Alistair looked at his betrothed. He saw her properly for the first time, not as the suitable duchess-in-waiting, but as a person. He saw the hard, acquisitive gleam in her eyes, the petty cruelty she mistook for strength, the utter void of empathy within her. She had not seen a frightened child. She had seen an inconvenience, a bit of refuse to be stepped over. Eleanor had seen a child who needed her. "The child had fallen," Alistair said, his voice flat and unfamiliar to his own ears. "Children fall constantly," Beatrice countered with a dismissive wave of her gloved hand. "It is what they do. One cannot be expected to disrupt one's afternoon for every clumsy toddler. His mother should have been watching him." His mother. The words echoed in the silent space of the carriage. Alistair felt a wave of nausea so profound he had to grip the velvet squabs of the seat. That night, he did not go to the ball he was meant to attend with Beatrice. He sent a curt note pleading a sudden illness, an excuse she would accept with thinly veiled annoyance. Instead, he went to his study, a room paneled in dark wood that had always felt like a sanctuary of order and control. Tonight, it felt like a tomb. He poured a brandy, the amber liquid sloshing in the crystal tumbler held by his unsteady hand. He stared into the empty fireplace, the events of the day replaying in his mind. The image of Eleanor's face, cold and contemptuous. The image of the child, his dark curls so like Alistair's own as a boy. He had been a fool, a blind, arrogant, trusting fool. He had accepted Marcus's word, accepted the damning letters without question, because his pride had been wounded. He had not fought for her. He had not demanded to see her, to hear the denial from her own lips. He had simply signed the papers and let her be cast into the darkness. What if it had all been a lie? The thought was a venomous serpent, coiling in his gut. If the betrayal was a lie, then everything that followed was a crime. His crime, the annulment, the 6 years of silence, the cold emptiness of his own life, all of it built upon a foundation of deceit. He strode to his desk and pulled out a sheet of heavy cream stationery. His hand was steady now, fueled by a cold, desperate certainty. He wrote a brief, clear message. He did not sign it with his name or title. He sealed the wax with the imprint of his thumb, not the blackwood signet that adorned his finger. He summoned his most trusted footman, a man who had been with him since before his marriage. "Take this to Mr. Davies on Fleet Street. Immediately. Wait for his reply." Mr. Davies was a man who moved in shadows, an inquiry agent of unparalleled discretion and terrifying efficiency. He found people who did not want to be found and uncovered truths that were meant to remain buried. Alistair had used him once before, to discreetly handle a blackmail attempt against a fellow peer. The note was simple. It contained a name he had not written in 6 years, a brief description, and the location of the racecourse. It asked a single, pivotal question: who is she? As the footman departed, Alistair walked to the long gallery, the portraits of his ancestors staring down at him with stoic disapproval. At the very end of the hall was a blank space on the wall, a slightly faded rectangle of damask wallpaper where a portrait had once hung. Her portrait. He had ordered it burned. He stood before that empty space for a long time, the brandy glass growing warm in his hand. He was not just looking at a blank wall. He was looking at the void he had created in his own life, a void he now suspected was filled with a truth so monstrous it would undo him completely. And for the first time in 6 years, he felt something other than cold apathy. He felt a profound, terrifying fear, and beneath it, a fragile, dangerous flicker of hope. Eleanor sat on the lumpy mattress in her small, second-floor room, the sounds of Oakhaven filtering through the single window, the clatter of iron-shod wheels on stone, the distant clang of a hammer on steel from the ironworks, the smell of coal smoke and damp wool. These were the sounds and smells of her life now. They had become a strange sort of comfort, a testament to her survival. Today that comfort was gone, replaced by the frantic, panicked beating of her heart. Thomas was asleep in the small cot beside her bed, his breathing deep and even. His wooden horse was clutched in his hand. He was safe, for now. But the sight of Alistair, of the Duke of Blackwood, had shattered the fragile peace she had spent 6 years building. She had run from London a terrified, heartbroken girl of 20. Pregnant, disgraced, and carrying nothing but a few sovereigns her lady's maid had pressed into her hand, and the small silver locket Alistair had given her during their courtship. The men her cousin-in-law Marcus had sent to escort her from the city had been clear. She was to disappear. If she ever tried to contact the Duke, if she ever breathed a word of her story, they would find her. The threat had been unspoken but absolute. She had believed them. She had fled north, changing her name, erasing her past. She had found this room in Mrs. Gable's boarding house, a place for respectable widows and working women. She had given birth to Thomas in this very room, with only the kind, no-nonsense landlady to help her. She had learned to sew, to mend, to take in laundry. She had scrubbed floors and haggled for day-old bread. She had transformed herself from a duchess into Mrs. Anson, a widow whose husband had died at sea. Her old life was a story she told herself sometimes in the dark, a strange, glittering fairy tale that had ended in fire and ruin. The Duchess of Blackwood was dead. Eleanor Anson was a survivor. But today, the ghost of that duchess had risen. Seeing him, so tall and powerful, standing beside that immaculate blonde woman, had felt like a physical assault. He had not changed. He still wore his power like a perfectly tailored coat. And he had looked at her. For a moment, she had seen the shock in his eyes, the dawning recognition, and she had felt nothing but a pure, white-hot rage. The man who had believed a handful of forged letters over the woman who shared his bed. The man who had not even granted her the dignity of a final confrontation, but had his cousin deliver the sentence of her banishment. The man who had cast her out, pregnant and alone, without a backward glance. She had hated him for 6 years, a deep, steady hatred that had been the fuel for her survival. But seeing him today, it was no longer a steady flame. It was a conflagration. She pulled a small, worn wooden box from under her mattress. Inside, nestled on a scrap of velvet, was the silver locket. It was tarnished now. She opened it. The tiny, painted miniature of Alistair stared up at her, the artist having captured the warmth and humor that had once been in his eyes, the eyes of the man she had loved, not the cold, remote Duke she had seen today. A single, hot tear fell onto the painted face, smearing the image. She snapped the locket shut. This was a weakness she could not afford. He had found her, or rather, he had seen her. It was only a matter of time before he came looking. A man like the Duke of Blackwood did not let such a mystery go unsolved. His pride would not allow it. She had to run. Again. But where? She had no money saved. Every penny she earned went to food, to rent, to Thomas's worn but sturdy shoes. Oakhaven was the only home her son had ever known. The thought of uprooting him, of dragging him into a life on the run, was unbearable. A soft knock came at her door. It was Mrs. Gable, holding a cup of steaming tea. The landlady's face was a roadmap of worry. "You are as pale as a sheet, my dear," she said, setting the cup on the small table. "The boy is well?" "He is fine. He is sleeping," Eleanor whispered. "It was the fall that shook you so?" Mrs. Gable asked, but her shrewd eyes suggested she knew it was more than that. Eleanor had been her tenant for nearly 6 years. The landlady knew Mrs. Anson was a woman with a past, though she had never pried. Eleanor shook her head, the lie catching in her throat. She couldn't do it. Not tonight. She buried her face in her hands, the first sob tearing through her with brutal force. Mrs. Gable was beside her in an instant, her work-roughened hand resting on Eleanor's shaking shoulder. "There now, child. There now. Whatever it is, we will face it in the morning." But Eleanor knew she could not face this. It was a storm from another world, a world of power and privilege she had long since fled, and it was coming for her. It was coming for her son. 2 days later, the reply from Mr. Davies arrived. Alistair was in his study, having not left the house since the races. He had canceled all his appointments, including those with Beatrice, sending messengers with terse, unapologetic notes. He could feel the tendrils of gossip already beginning to weave their way through the drawing rooms of London. The Duke was unwell. The Duke was having second thoughts. He broke the seal on Davies's letter with a trembling finger. The report was, as always, concise and devastatingly clear. It detailed the existence of one Mrs. Eleanor Anson, resident of Oakhaven, a grim industrial town in the north. It confirmed her presence at the racecourse. It described her as a widow, earning a meager living as a seamstress and laundress. And then, the final paragraph. Subject has one child, a son, Thomas Anson. Age, 5 years, estimated 10 months. No official record of birth located. Local rumor suggests the child was born shortly after Mrs. Anson's arrival in Oakhaven. The boy bears a strong resemblance to portraits of the Beaumont family, specifically the eyes. Alistair dropped the letter. The paper fluttered to the floor, but he did not see it. He saw a small boy with his eyes. His son. A son conceived in the marriage bed at Blackwood Manor. Born in a rented room in a smoky northern town. A son who had been raised in poverty while his father lived in obscene luxury. The full, monstrous weight of his failure crashed down upon him. He had not just been a fool. He had been a monster. He had condemned his own wife and his unborn child to a life of hardship and fear based on the whispers of a jealous cousin. The rage came then. A cold, black, murderous rage. It was not directed at Eleanor, or even at himself. It was for Marcus, his trusted cousin, his advisor, the man who had guided him since his father's death, the man who had looked him in the eye and expressed his profound sorrow while orchestrating the ruin of his family. And Beatrice. Her ambition, her coldness, it all snapped into focus. She and Marcus were thick as thieves. How deep did this conspiracy run? He rang the bell for his valet. Pack my bags for a journey north. Plain clothes. No livery on the carriage. And send a message to my solicitor. He is to draw up a notice immediately. My engagement to Lady Beatrice Finch is terminated, effective immediately. The valet, a man who had served him for a decade, blinked in surprise but wisely said nothing. Your Grace, he murmured, and bowed. Alistair did not wait for the carriage to be prepared. He walked out the front door of his London townhouse, hailed a common hansom cab, and directed it to the railway station. He was no longer the Duke of Blackwood, a man bound by convention and expectation. He was just a man going to find his wife, a man going to beg for the forgiveness he in no way deserved. The journey north was a penance. The soot from the engine coated his clothes, the hard bench of the third-class carriage a stark contrast to the cushioned luxury he was accustomed to. He did not notice. His mind was a maelstrom of regret and fury. Every mile that clicked by on the tracks was another mile he had allowed his wife and son to suffer alone. He arrived in Oakhaven in the late afternoon. It was a town painted in shades of gray and brown, shrouded in a perpetual haze of smoke from the ironworks that were its lifeblood. The air was thick with the metallic tang of coal and industry. It was the bleakest place he had ever seen. The thought of Eleanor, who had grown up surrounded by the lush green beauty of the Kent countryside, living here was a fresh torment. He found Mrs. Gable's boarding house easily enough. It was a tall, narrow building of soot-stained brick, cleaner than its neighbors but still bearing the marks of the town's oppressive grime. He stood across the street for a long time, watching. He felt like an intruder, a creature from another world. Then he saw her. She came out of a small draper's shop, a paper-wrapped parcel of thread in her hand. She was wearing the same dark dress. The weak afternoon sun caught the auburn glints in her hair as she paused, looking up and down the street before crossing. There was a caution in her movements, the wariness of a hunted animal. He could not wait. He crossed the street, his heart pounding against his ribs like a trapped bird. He stepped in front of her, blocking her path. Eleanor. The name was a ragged whisper. She froze, her head snapping up. The parcel of thread dropped from her hand, scattering spools across the grimy cobblestones. Her face, which had been set in lines of weary concentration, became a mask of ice. The contempt he had seen at the races was back, but now it was laced with a cold, pure fury. "What are you doing here, Your Grace?" The title was a slap. It drew a line between them as wide and as deep as the past 6 years. I saw you," he stammered, his carefully rehearsed speeches vanishing from his mind. "At the races. I had to—" "You had to what?" She cut him off, her voice low and shaking with suppressed rage. "You had to come and inspect the ruins? To satisfy your curiosity about the woman you threw away like so much garbage?" "No," he said, taking a step toward her. "Eleanor, I was wrong. I was a fool. I was deceived." "Deceived?" She laughed, a short, bitter sound that held no humor. "You were not deceived. You were relieved. You found an excuse to be rid of a wife who was not as biddable as you hoped. Do not insult my intelligence by pretending otherwise." Before he could answer, a small voice called out, "Mama!" A little boy came running from the direction of the boarding house. He stopped short when he saw Alistair, his eyes widening as he took in the tall, imposing stranger standing before his mother. He clutched a familiar wooden horse in his hand. Alistair's world tilted on its axis. He could not breathe. He could not think. All he could do was stare at the child, his son. It was not a suspicion anymore. It was a certainty that settled deep in his bones, an undeniable truth. The boy had his mother's mouth, but the shape of his face, the dark intensity of his eyes, they were Beaumont eyes. They were his eyes. He knelt, heedless of the filth on the street, bringing himself down to the child's level. The boy took a half-step back, hiding behind Eleanor's skirts. Alistair looked from the boy to Eleanor, his own eyes pleading. "He is mine," he said, not a question, but a statement of shattered, irrefutable fact. Eleanor's face hardened into granite. She pulled the boy closer, her hand resting protectively on his head. "He is mine," she retorted, her voice like flint. "You have no right to him. You have no right to us. You erased me, remember? You declared our marriage never existed. In the eyes of the law and God, you are a stranger to me, and you are nothing to him." She bent down, gathered the scattered spools of thread, and took Thomas's hand. "Go back to your perfect fiancé and your perfect life, Your Grace," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "There is nothing for you here." She walked away without a backward glance, leaving Alistair kneeling alone on the cobblestones of a town that smelled of smoke and despair. The Duke of Blackwood, a man who commanded fortunes and estates, had been dismissed as if he were nothing, and he knew, with a soul-crushing certainty, that it was exactly what he deserved. He did not leave. He sent his man of business, who had followed him north with his luggage, back to London with the ducal carriage. He then walked into the only inn in Oakhaven, the Iron Bell, and took a room. The place was grim, smelling of damp stone, stale ale, and fried onions. The bed was hard, the water for the basin was cold, and the single window looked out onto a bleak alley. It was perfect. This was a penance he could understand. His first act was to write the letter to Beatrice. It was brutally short. He expressed no regret. He offered no explanation beyond stating that their union was impossible. He knew the scandal would be immense, but he found he did not care. The opinions of the ton seemed like the chattering of insects from a distant world. His second act was to write to Mr. Davies. The instructions were extensive. Uncover every detail of Lord Marcus Thorne's activities for the past 7 years, his finances, his associates, his debts. I want to know who he paid, who he spoke to, who he conspired with. I want the truth of my annulment. Spare no expense. Then he began his siege, not of Eleanor, but of the life she had built. He knew he could not force his way in. He had tried that, and her contempt had been his just reward. He had to earn his way. He saw her the next morning, leaving the boarding house with a large basket of laundry. She walked with her head held high, her back straight, but he could see the strain in her shoulders, the exhaustion in her face. He stayed in the shadows of the inn's doorway, watching until she was out of sight. He spent his days learning the rhythms of her life. He saw her haggle for vegetables in the market, her voice firm and practiced. He saw her delivering mended garments to the wives of shopkeepers. He saw Thomas playing in the street with other children, their faces smudged with dirt, their laughter echoing in the grim alleyways. He watched his son, a fierce, painful ache in his chest. The boy was sturdy and quick, with a serious expression that often broke into a sudden, brilliant smile. Eleanor's smile. Alistair began with small, anonymous acts. He heard the innkeeper complaining about Mrs. Gable's leaky roof. The next day, he found a local builder and paid him handsomely in cash to repair the entire roof of the boarding house, instructing the man to say only that an anonymous benefactor had settled the account. He saw Eleanor struggling to carry a heavy load of firewood. The following morning, a cart delivered a cord of the finest, driest oak to Mrs. Gable's door, with a note that simply said, "For the winter." He did not approach her. He did not speak to her. He simply watched, and he waited, and he tried to ease the burdens she carried, one small, invisible stone at a time. One afternoon, he was standing across the street when Thomas, embroiled in a boisterous game, tripped and fell hard. His wooden horse flew from his grasp and skittered across the cobblestones, coming to a stop near Alistair's feet. The other children laughed. Thomas's face crumpled, tears welling in his beautiful Beaumont eyes. This time, Alistair did not hesitate. He crossed the street and knelt, just as Eleanor had done at the races. He picked up the small, worn toy. It felt impossibly fragile in his large hand. He held it out to the boy. "This is a fine horse," he said, his voice rough. "He looks very brave." Thomas looked from the horse to Alistair's face, his tears forgotten. He was not afraid. There was a cautious curiosity in his gaze. He reached out a small, grimy hand and took the horse. "His name is Hector," the boy said softly. "Hector," Alistair repeated, a lump forming in his throat. "A good, strong name for a hero." "Mama!" Thomas called, turning and running back toward the boarding house. Eleanor appeared in the doorway, her face pale with alarm. She saw Alistair kneeling in the street. Then her gaze went to Thomas, checking he was unharmed. She pulled her son behind her, her body a shield. Alistair slowly stood up. He did not try to speak. He just looked at her, letting her see the undisguised pain and regret in his eyes. He gave a small, formal bow of his head and walked back to his inn. It was the first time she had looked at him with something other than pure hatred. He had seen fear and a flicker of profound confusion. It was a start. Weeks turned into a month. Alistair's fine London clothes grew worn. He became a familiar, if mysterious, figure in Oakhaven. The locals called him the gentleman, a quiet, somber man who kept to himself and paid for everything in cash. He ate his meals in the common room of the inn, listening to the town's gossip, learning more about the life Eleanor had been forced to lead. Then the package from Davies arrived. It was thick. Alistair locked his door and spread the contents across the rickety table. There were bank ledgers, sworn affidavits from dismissed servants, and copies of legal documents. It was a meticulous, brutal dissection of a 6-year conspiracy. It was all there. Marcus was deeply in debt, his gambling habit having spiraled out of control. Beatrice's father had agreed to settle his debts in exchange for Marcus, ensuring his daughter became the next Duchess of Blackwood. Davies had located the footman who had been paid to place a man's coat in Eleanor's private sitting room on the night of the alleged infidelity. He had found the forger who had created the love letters, a man Marcus had used on previous occasions to handle his creditors. He had even found a copy of the annulment petition, which rested on the testimony of a Lord Ashworth, a man who swore he had been pre-contracted to Eleanor. Lord Ashworth, Davies dryly noted, had died of drink 2 years prior, but before that he had been a known associate of Marcus, a man who would sign anything for the price of a case of claret. The betrayal was more complete, more venal and sordid than Alistair could ever have imagined. His cousin had sold him, his wife, and his son for 30 pieces of silver, all to settle a gambling debt and secure an alliance. He packed the documents carefully. The next morning he took the first train back to London. His time of quiet penance was over. It was time for retribution. His arrival at his London townhouse was unannounced. He walked in, his plain, travel-worn clothes a stark contrast to the gleaming marble and polished mahogany of the entrance hall. The butler stared, his professional composure cracking for a moment. "Your Grace, we were not expecting you." "Where is Lord Thorne?" Alistair's voice was cold enough to freeze water. "He is in the library, Your Grace, with Lady Beatrice." Alistair walked toward the library, the rage he had been suppressing for weeks now, a controlled, white-hot furnace inside him. He pushed the heavy oak doors open without knocking. Marcus and Beatrice were standing by the fireplace, glasses of sherry in their hands. They looked comfortable, proprietary. They turned, their faces registering surprise, which quickly morphed into displeasure. "Alistair," Marcus began, a note of paternal disappointment in his voice. "We have been worried sick, to run off to God knows where, to break your engagement with no explanation." "Be quiet, Marcus," Alistair said. The command was spoken softly, but it cut through the air like a razor. Marcus fell silent, his eyes narrowing. Beatrice stepped forward, her expression one of calculated concern. "Darling, what is this about? You look dreadful. This ridiculous flight of fancy has gone on long enough." Alistair ignored her. He walked to the desk and laid a single folded document upon it. It was the sworn confession of the forger. "I have spent the last month in a town called Oakhaven, Marcus," he said, his voice dangerously calm. "It is a rather unpleasant place, all smoke and poverty, but it is where my wife has been living for the past 6 years." Beatrice gasped. Marcus's face went pale. "Your wife is on the continent," Marcus said, his voice strained. "She took the money and—" "She took nothing," Alistair interrupted, "because you never offered her anything. Your men threw her out with the clothes on her back and a handful of coins. They threatened her life. Also, you could pay your gambling debts, and this creature," he gestured to Beatrice without looking at her, "could get her hands on my title." He laid another document on the desk, the footman's affidavit, then another, the bank ledgers showing the payments from Beatrice's father to Marcus. He laid them out one by one, a methodical presentation of their treachery. "Lord Ashworth sends his regards from hell," Alistair said conversationally. "It seems his signature was quite a bargain." Marcus stared at the papers, his face crumbling. The facade of the elder statesman, the concerned cousin, dissolved, revealing the desperate, cornered rat beneath. "You cannot prove any of this," he blustered, but his voice lacked conviction. "Oh, I can," Alistair said. "And I will. I will present this to the Lord Chancellor. I will have the annulment overturned as fraudulent. I will have you charged with conspiracy. I will see you stripped of your title and left with nothing but the clothes on your back, a taste of the life you sentenced my wife to." He finally turned his gaze on Beatrice. "As for you, your father's fortune will not be enough to buy you a husband in this country or any other when I am finished. Your name will be synonymous with disgrace." Beatrice let out a strangled cry, her face contorted with fury and fear. "You would ruin us? For her? A woman who—" "A woman I love," Alistair finished, the words tasting strange and true on his tongue. "A woman I failed. A woman whose name I will spend the rest of my life clearing." He looked back at Marcus. "You have 24 hours to leave the country. If you are still in England by this time tomorrow, I will have you arrested." He turned and walked out of the library, leaving them standing amidst the ruins of their scheme. He did not feel triumph. He only felt a vast, aching emptiness. He had torn down the conspiracy. Now came the harder part, rebuilding a life. He returned to Oakhaven 2 days later, not as a penitent, but as a petitioner. He did not go to the inn. He went directly to the boarding house and knocked on the door. Mrs. Gable answered, her expression wary. "I need to speak with Eleanor," he said. His voice was quiet, stripped of all ducal authority. "She does not wish to see you, Your Grace." "I know," he said, "but I have something for her, something she must see." He held out a large, sealed oilskin packet. "It is the truth, all of it. Please, I am begging you, ask her to read it." He saw the flicker of pity in the older woman's eyes. She took the packet. "I will give it to her. That is all I can promise." He nodded, turned, and walked away. He went back to his grim room at the Iron Bell to wait. Eleanor stared at the packet on her small table for a full day. She was terrified to open it. She feared it was a trick, a threat, a legal document meant to take Thomas from her. But Mrs. Gable's words echoed in her ears. "The man looked broken, child. Whatever is in there, he believes it is his only hope." Finally, with trembling hands, she broke the seal. She read for hours, spreading the documents across her bed. The forger's confession, the footman's testimony, the bank records. The story of Marcus's and Beatrice's cold, calculated betrayal unfolded before her. She did not feel vindicated. She felt a profound, hollow sorrow. All the years of hatred she had nurtured toward Alistair, all the bitterness, it had been directed at a man who was, in his own way, as much a victim as she was. He had been a fool, yes, a proud, blind fool. But he had not been the monster she had painted him to be. The monster was his cousin. She read until the sun went down, the papers illuminated by the flickering light of a single candle. She saw the lengths Alistair had gone to, not just to find her, but to uncover this truth. The systematic, ruthless way he had dismantled the conspiracy. He had done it not just to clear his own name, but to clear hers. The anger that had been her shield for 6 years began to crumble, leaving her feeling raw and exposed. A week later, Thomas fell ill. It started as a cough, but by nightfall, he was burning with fever, his small body shivering uncontrollably. The local doctor was an old man who smelled of whiskey and offered little more than platitudes. Eleanor sat by her son's bed, bathing his forehead with a cool cloth, her heart constricting with a terror she had not felt since the day she was cast out of her home. She was alone, utterly alone, and her son was slipping away from her. In the depths of the night, with Thomas's breathing growing shallow and ragged, desperation overrode her pride. She scribbled a note and, rousing a sleeping Mrs. Gable, begged her to have it sent to the Iron Bell. The note contained only 3 words. "Please, help me." Alistair came within minutes. He did not knock. The door to her room burst open, and he was there, his hair disheveled, his coat thrown hastily over his shirt. He took in the scene in a single glance. Eleanor, pale and terrified. Thomas, limp and feverish in the cot. He did not speak. He acted. He knelt by the cot, his hand gently touching Thomas's forehead. His face, which had been tight with alarm, settled into a mask of grim determination. "He needs a proper physician," he said. "I sent a rider for Dr. Albright from Manchester an hour ago. I suspected. I have had him on retainer nearby, just in case." Eleanor stared at him. He had anticipated this. He had been preparing for it. "He will be here by dawn," Alistair continued, his voice calm and reassuring. "Until then, we keep him cool. We need more water." For the rest of the night, they worked together in the small, cramped room. They were not a duke and a seamstress. They were a father and a mother, united in a primal, terrifying battle for their child's life. Alistair was a quiet, solid presence. He fetched water. He held Thomas's hand. He spoke in low, soothing tones when the boy cried out in his delirium. He did not try to comfort Eleanor with words. He simply stood with her, sharing the terrible vigil. As dawn broke, casting a pale, gray light into the room, Dr. Albright arrived. He was a brisk, competent man who took charge immediately. After a long examination, he looked at them, his expression serious but not grim. "It is a severe inflammation of the lungs, but he is strong. With proper care, he will recover." The relief that washed over Eleanor was so immense her knees buckled. Alistair's arm was there, catching her, holding her steady. She leaned against him, her strength completely gone, and for the first time in 6 years, she did not pull away. When the doctor had left his instructions and departed, they stood in the quiet room, listening to the sound of Thomas's breathing, which was already less strained. "You did not have to stay," Eleanor whispered, her voice hoarse with exhaustion. Alistair looked at her, his face etched with the night's fear. "He is my son," he said simply. "You are my wife. I will never leave either of you again." She looked into his eyes and saw no pride, no arrogance. She saw only a deep, profound remorse, and a love that had somehow survived 6 years of lies and silence. "I believe you, Alistair," she said, the name feeling both strange and familiar on her tongue. "But forgiving, that will take time." "I have nothing but time," he promised, his voice thick with emotion. "And I will spend every second of it earning my way back to you." They returned to Blackwood Manor a month later. The fraudulent annulment was overturned in a quiet legal proceeding that caused a firestorm of gossip, all of it directed at the disgraced Lord Thorne and Lady Beatrice, who had both fled to the Continent. Eleanor was the Duchess of Blackwood once more, but she was not the same woman who had left. She did not fall back into the role of a decorative noblewoman. With Alistair's full support, she used the Blackwood fortune to establish a foundation in Oakhaven, a place that provided shelter, food, and skills training for destitute women and their children. She traveled there often, no longer Mrs. Anson the seamstress, but a duchess who understood their plight because she had lived it. Alistair changed as well. The cold, remote Duke was gone, replaced by a man who was quieter, more thoughtful, and utterly devoted to his family. He spent his afternoons not in his clubs, but on the floor of the nursery, helping Thomas build magnificent forts out of cushions. One warm summer evening, a year after their return, Eleanor found him in the rose garden. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and violet. The air was fragrant with the smell of roses and damp earth. Thomas was a short distance away, chasing fireflies, his laughter like music in the twilight. Alistair was not looking at his ledgers or his correspondence. He was simply watching his son. Eleanor came to stand beside him. He reached out and took her hand. It was soft again, but he could still feel the strength in it, a strength he now revered. He brought her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles. "I used to hate these gardens," he said softly. "They were too quiet, too perfect. After you were gone, they felt like a mausoleum." "And now?" she asked. He looked from his son's joyful, dancing figure back to her face, his eyes full of a love that was deeper and truer than anything he had known before. "Now," he said, his voice full of wonder, "they sound like home.